You know that feeling, right? You see a photo or a painting or even just a shot in a movie, and it just clicks. It feels perfect, but you can't quite explain why. Well, that's because there's a hidden language at work, an invisible design that's guiding your eye and making you feel something. Today, we're going to learn how to speak that language, and it all starts with a really simple question.
Why is that? We've all been there. You just know when an image works. But here's the secret. It's not magic, and it's not an accident. It's actually the result of some very intentional choices, guided by principles that artists have been using for centuries. And the big answer to this question? Well, it has a name.
And that name is composition. It's really just a fancy word for how all the pieces of an image are arranged inside the frame. It's the how. How a photographer makes you feel a sense of peace, how a director builds nail-biting suspense. It's the secret ingredient, the how behind the wow.
Okay, so where do we even begin with all this? Well, the most important job of composition is to be a tour guide for our eyes. Seriously, it's all about telling the viewer exactly where to look and in what order.
Every great image has what's called a focal point. Just think of it like the main character of the story or the headliner at a concert. It's the very first place the artist wants your eye to land. So, how do you pull that off? How do you make sure people look right where you want them to? Well, there's a classic technique that's a perfect place to start.
Let's talk about something you've probably heard of, the rule of thirds. All you have to do is imagine a tic-tac-toe board drawn over your image. Now, the rule says that instead of sticking your subject right in the bullseye, you should place it on one of those 4 spots where the lines cross. It's a tiny shift, but it makes the whole thing feel more balanced and dynamic. Our eyes are just naturally drawn to those off-center points. It breaks up the symmetry, and for some reason, our brains just love it.
All right, another super powerful tool in our tour guide kit is something called leading lines. These are basically lines in the image. They can be a road, a fence, anything really, that act like big, glowing arrows, pointing your eyes exactly where they need to go. They literally create a path for you to follow, saying, hey, the important stuff is over here. And different kinds of lines create totally different feelings. You see tall, vertical lines in a shot of a city, like in Trainspotting, and they make you feel the scale and height of the buildings. Then you've got diagonal lines, which are great for creating a sense of movement and energy, like in The Hurt Locker. And then you have converging lines, like that terrifying hallway in The Shining, that just suck your eyes straight to a single point, creating this intense, unavoidable focus.
Okay, so we've got a handle on how to point the viewer's eye to one spot. But what about everything else in the frame? The next step is all about how you organize the entire space and how you think about the relationship between the subject and, maybe even more importantly, the space where there isn't anything.
And this brings us to this idea of positive and negative space. It's pretty simple, really. Positive space is the main subject, the stuff you're supposed to be looking at. Negative space is just the empty area all around it. But that empty space is doing a ton of work. It can create a feeling of quiet simplicity, or it can make a subject feel totally isolated. They define each other. You can't have one without the other.
And believe me, negative space can be an amazing storyteller. Just look at this shot from the movie Punch Drunk Love. The character is this tiny little figure surrounded by this huge, empty sea of blue. That empty space isn't just a background. It's practically a character in itself. It's screaming loneliness. It makes him look so small, so isolated, without a single word being spoken. The emptiness tells the whole story.
Here's another really cool trick for organizing your shot: creating a frame within the frame. This is exactly what it sounds like. You use something that's already in the scene, like a doorway or a window, or even the space between 2 trees, to create a second frame around your main subject. It's a fantastic way to add a sense of depth and really draw attention to your focal point.
And this can get really, really clever and symbolic. The all-time classic example has to be this shot from The Graduate. The frame here isn't a window, it's a leg. And with that one choice, the filmmaker is telling us so much. It visually traps the main character, making him look cornered and powerless. It communicates seduction and danger all at once. That is just brilliant visual storytelling.
So, we've talked about guiding the eye and structuring the frame. Now we get to the really juicy stuff. Using composition to create a mood, an emotion. This is the layer that takes a picture from being just good to being completely unforgettable.
And one of the most effective ways to do that is with contrast. All contrast means is putting 2 very different things right next to each other. Light next to dark, a rough texture next to a smooth one, a big object next to a tiny one. When you do that, it actually makes both things seem even more intense.
Our brains just can't help but compare them, and that's what creates drama and visual excitement.
A perfect example of this is high-contrast lighting, which has a cool old name, chiaroscuro. Painters like Caravaggio mastered this hundreds of years ago. They would use these incredibly deep, dark shadows right up against these brilliant, bright highlights. What that did was make a totally flat painting feel three-dimensional, and it just injected so much drama and emotion into the scene.
But contrast isn't only about light and shadow. It's huge when it comes to color, too. See, colors that are directly opposite each other on the color wheel are called complementary colors. A really common pair is a warm orange and a cool blue. When you put those two side by side, they make each other pop like crazy. They create the strongest possible visual clash, making each color seem way more vibrant than it would on its own.
And you see this in movies constantly. I mean, Mad Max Fury Road is basically a 2-hour masterclass in this one idea. The whole look of that movie is built on the intense contrast between that burning orange desert sand and that deep teal blue sky. It's not just pretty to look at. It makes the world feel totally alien, epic, and almost unnaturally vivid. And it's all because of that deliberate color choice.
So we've gone through a lot here, right? Rule of thirds, leading lines, negative space, contrast. But it's so important to remember one thing about all these techniques. This is not a checklist you have to follow.
Exactly. This quote just nails it. You should think of these ideas as guiding principles, not as strict rules you can never, ever break. There are tools in your creative toolbox, and you, the artist, get to decide which tool to use or when to ignore them all and try something completely different.
You know, the ultimate goal is to get to a place where you don't even have to consciously think about this stuff anymore. It just becomes instinct. It becomes a part of how you see the world. That way, you can focus on what really matters, translating that vision you have in your head into an image that communicates exactly what you feel.
So look, we've just covered the basic grammar of visual language, and it is an incredibly powerful language, one that can tell complex stories and make people feel profound emotions, all without a single word. So I guess the only question left to ask is the most important one of all. Now that you know the language, what are you going to say?